Okay, so you know that feeling, right, where you're like trying to make sense of the world,
Yeah.
and it's like all the old rules have just kind of like gone out the window?
Uh-huh.
Like what is true, even what is fair,
Yeah.
and we're all just swimming in this sea of information and trying to find something solid to hold on to
Right.
without like getting totally lost.
Yeah, I think in times like these,
Yeah.
when everything feels kind of shaky,
Yeah.
there's actually a lot of value in maybe doing something that sounds a little pretentious, but it's actually quite practical.
Okay.
And that is like acting as philosophers.
Okay, acting as philosophers now.
Yeah.
I know some people listening might be thinking like, okay, dusty old books,
Right.
like big beards.
Exactly.
What does that actually look like?
Yeah, it doesn't have to be, going and getting a philosophy PhD.
Right.
It's more about sort of engaging in that spirit of inquiry,
Right.
right? Like, what are the fundamental questions that we're facing? Both in terms of, like, how we understand the world, how we think about knowledge,
Yes.
well, what our values are.
Right.
And for this deep dive, we've got a really fascinating guide to help us think through some of these things.
Okay.
And that is Jean-François Lyotard.
Lyotard, now a lot of people probably know him from that book,
Right.
The Postmodern Condition.
Exactly.
Which I feel like kind of put the whole idea of postmodernism on the map.
Yes, absolutely. It's a seminal text.
But I think there's a certain way that people sometimes interpret that book
Yeah.
that I think we should address right up front,
Okay.
which is that sometimes people hear postmodernism
Right.
and they think it just means like anything goes.
Yeah.
Like there's no truth, there's no right or wrong.
Right.
It's just like everyone's opinion is equally valid.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really crucial point to clarify.
Right.
Because while Lyotard definitely talks about this kind of erosion of these big unifying stories that used to kind of give us a shared sense of reality,
Right.
his work is so much more nuanced than just saying, like, anything goes.
Yeah.
In fact, especially in his later writings,
Yeah.
he grapples intensely with the question of, like, how can we even think about justice
Right.
in a world where those grand narratives have kind of lost their power?
So this isn't just like a rehash of philosophical relativism.
No, not at all.
Okay. So if we're going to like act as philosophers
Right.
and take Lyotard as our guide for this deep dive,
Yeah.
what are some of the key concepts?
Okay, so some of the big ones
Yeah.
that we'll be unpacking are, first of all, that idea of meta-narratives,
Okay.
right, which we've already kind of touched on. These big stories that we tell ourselves to make sense of the world.
Right.
Another one is the idea of language games.
Okay.
And this is something he gets from Wittgenstein.
Okay.
This idea that meaning and truth really operate within specific contexts,
Right.
right? Like different social settings, intellectual communities.
Yeah.
So there's not necessarily one universal language game. And then another really powerful concept that he develops is the idea of the different.
Okay. The different.
The different, and this is a way of understanding certain kinds of disagreements
Oh, yeah.
where there's no common ground
Right.
to even have a resolution.
Okay.
And then finally, we're going to get to this really challenging notion of the unpresentable.
The unpresentable.
The unpresentable.
Okay. So not just abstract terms, though.
Right.
These are actually like tools
These are tools.
for understanding the world.
Exactly.
Okay. So let's start with meta-narratives.
Right.
Like what did Lyotard actually mean by that?
So when he talked about meta-narratives,
Yeah.
what he meant were these grand overarching stories or frameworks
Okay.
that have traditionally given us a sense of unity and meaning
Right.
to our understanding of history, of society, of knowledge itself.
Okay. So like a big picture,
Big picture.
like a
exactly.
big overarching story.
So think about, for example, the idea that history is inevitably progressing
Yeah.
towards a better future. Or the Marxist narrative of the working class eventually achieving liberation.
Right.
Or even the liberal belief that free markets will ultimately lead to prosperity for all.
Right.
These are all examples of meta-narratives.
Okay.
These big stories that have kind of shaped our values
Right.
and guided our actions for centuries.
And his argument was that these were breaking down, like
Yeah.
we were starting
Yeah.
to not believe them anymore.
He observed what he called a growing incredulity towards meta-narratives.
Okay.
And he saw this manifesting in a lot of different ways.
Like what, for example?
So, for example, even in the West,
Yeah.
he pointed out that polls were starting to show
Yeah.
a significant number of people doubting that the next generation would be better off than the current one,
Right.
which really kind of strikes at the heart of
Yeah.
that long-held meta-narrative of continuous progress.
Right. Like the future's always going to be better.
Exactly.
Okay. So if we're acting as philosophers here,
Yes.
what's like the takeaway there?
I think the core insight is that we can't necessarily rely
Right.
on these big universal stories anymore to understand everything.
Okay.
We need to be more aware of the different kind of mini narratives
Okay.
that are at play.
Yeah, that definitely resonates, I think, today.
Yeah.
That loss of faith in progress.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, you mentioned Hannah Arendt earlier,
Right.
and I'm wondering how her work connects to Lyotard's thinking.
So Lyotard saw a really interesting parallel between his concept of the decline of meta-narratives
Right.
and Arndt's analysis of what she called the loss of authority
Okay.
in traditional institutions.
Right.
So his idea was that when these big stories lose their credibility,
Yeah.
the authority of the institutions that kind of derive their legitimacy from those stories also starts to weaken.
I see.
So people become less inclined to just simply trust
Right.
the pronouncements of established authorities.
Right. Like if you don't believe the big story,
Exactly.
you're not going to believe the institutions
Exactly.
that are based on it.
Exactly.
Okay, so what does this all mean for politics then?
Right. Well, one of the things that Lyotard observed
Yeah.
was that both sides of the political spectrum
Okay.
were kind of struggling to maintain their traditional appeals
Right.
in a consumer culture
Right.
that increasingly prioritizes individual desires and immediate gratification
Right.
over these kind of larger shared ideals.
Right. So like the progressive movements,
Yeah,
that might have relied on this narrative of collective social change.
exactly.
That's kind of harder to do now.
Yeah. And on the other side, conservative viewpoints
Hmm.
that were rooted in appeals to tradition and established values
Right.
also find themselves in a world where consumerism often seems to trump those grander visions.
Right. So it's like everyone's focused on just getting
Yeah.
more stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. It's all about the individual.
This all sounds kind of unsettling.
Right.
Like the erosion of this kind of shared understanding. Did Lyotard see this as like inevitably leading to nihilism?
That's a really important distinction
Okay.
because for him, the breakdown of meta-narratives wasn't necessarily a slide into nihilism.
Okay.
It wasn't like, oh, well, nothing matters anymore.
Okay.
Instead, he saw it as kind of a liberation,
Okay.
a moment that compels us to look for new ways
Right.
to think about justice and knowledge,
Right.
precisely because those old, all-encompassing frameworks
Yeah.
no longer hold.
So not an ending, but like
Yeah,
a new beginning,
exactly. A new challenge.
a new
Wait.
challenge. Okay.
Yeah.
So to understand his perspective even more,
Right.
I think it would be helpful to kind of get a sketch of his intellectual journey.
Okay.
Because you mentioned he was engaged with Marxism early on.
Yeah, so his background is actually really fascinating.
Okay.
He starts out with these kind of Marxist leanings in the 1950s.
Okay.
He's even politically involved.
Okay.
And then over time, he starts to become more and more critical of
Right.
these grand theories. And especially the events of May 68 in France were
Yeah.
kind of a turning point for him,
Okay.
where he felt that Marxism, with its focus on economic structures,
Right.
couldn't fully capture the
Mhm.
kind of underlying desires and energies
Well,
that
yeah.
were fueling those protests.
Yeah.
And so this leads him to really start to focus more
Oh.
on the kind of fragmented nature
Right.
of knowledge and experience.
Okay. So around this time, he starts to develop this idea of the figural.
Right.
What did he mean by that?
Yeah. So the figural, which he explores in his book Discourse
Right.
Figure,
Okay.
refers to those aspects of our experience.
Okay.
Emotions, sensory details, even kind of the unsaid
Right.
that language can only partially capture.
Right.
So think about like the feeling you get from a piece of music
Right.
or the power of a striking image.
Right.
These are things that aren't easily reduced to words.
Right.
And he contrasted this with what he called discourse, which is the kind of structured systems of language and logic.
Right.
So for him, the figural is this kind of disruptive force
Okay.
that can't be fully controlled by linguistic systems.
Right.
And it's where new meanings and understandings can emerge.
So we need to be paying attention to that.
Absolutely.
Okay.
If we're going to be acting as philosophers,
So not just what's being said,
not just what's being said.
but also like the underlying feelings and images.
Exactly.
And are those two completely separate?
No, he saw them as interconnected,
Okay.
right? So on the one hand, our language shapes how we see things,
Right.
but on the other hand, the figural can also push the boundaries of language,
Right.
allowing for creativity, new ways of expressing ourselves.
Okay, so let's go back to the postmodern condition,
Okay.
where he defines postmodernism as incredulity towards meta-narratives.
Right.
How did he see that specifically playing out in the world of knowledge?
Okay, so in the postmodern condition, one of his main arguments is that the traditional ways that science and other forms of knowledge
Right.
have justified their authority
Yeah.
by appealing to these grand narratives of progress or enlightenment
Right.
were losing their persuasive power.
Okay.
So he talked about a crisis of legitimation.
Right. Like, how do we know it's true?
How do we know it's true? Exactly.
And if we don't have that big story anymore,
Yeah,
it becomes a problem.
it becomes a problem.
Okay.
And what he saw happening was that increasingly,
Yeah.
scientific knowledge was being valued less for its inherent truth
Okay.
and more for its practical applications,
Yeah.
its ability to be translated into technology
Right.
and drive economic growth.
This sounds so relevant today.
Right.
With like the emphasis on STEM field,
Exactly.
and the economic impact of knowledge.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
He was very prescient about this shift
Yeah.
towards what we now call the knowledge economy.
Right.
And he predicted that knowledge that couldn't be easily quantified
Okay.
or applied technologically would become increasingly marginalized.
All right.
And he also foresaw a change in the role of universities,
How so?
moving away from that traditional ideal of educating well-rounded citizens
Right.
towards more of a focus on training specialists and information managers
Right.
for the economy.
So for someone trying to act as a philosopher,
Yeah.
what are the implications of this shift?
Well, I think one of the concerns that he raised
Yeah.
was that the dominance of this, what he called operativity criterion.
The operativity criteria.
The idea that knowledge is primarily valuable
Okay.
if it's operational or economically useful
Right.
can lead to a neglect of
Yeah.
other forms of knowledge,
Yeah.
including critical thinking, philosophical inquiry,
Right.
things that don't necessarily have immediate practical applications.
So as philosophers,
Yeah,
we need to be aware of that.
absolutely.
Okay. So in this kind of postmodern condition of knowledge,
Right.
how does he approach these big questions like
Yeah.
justice?
Right. So this is where we get into his later work,
Okay.
particularly Just Gaming and the Different.
Okay.
And in Just Gaming,
Yeah.
he explores this really interesting idea
Okay.
that in the absence of these overarching meta-narratives,
Right.
we're essentially judging without criteria
Judging without criteria.
in the sense of having no ultimate universally agreed upon foundation
Okay.
for our ethical and political judgments.
So does that just mean, again, anything goes?
Well, that's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
Because he argues that even without those grand foundations, we
Mhm.
aren't just left with complete chaos.
Okay.
For him, what constitutes a fundamental injustice is when the very possibility
Okay.
of continuing to ask questions about justice
Right.
is shut down.
Okay.
So when certain voices are silenced or
Yeah.
their experiences are denied,
Yeah.
that's where injustice lies.
So it's not just that there's not one answer.
Right.
It's that you can't even ask the question.
Exactly. You can't even ask the question.
And this leads directly to his concept of the different,
The different. Okay.
which is a really, really important idea for him.
Okay, so what is a different?
So a different friend for Lyotard
Yeah.
is a specific kind of conflict
Okay.
where there's no common framework
Okay.
or set of rules
Right.
for resolving the disagreement fairly.
Okay.
Applying the rules of one side inevitably does violence to the other.
Can you give us an example of that?
Yeah, so one of the examples that he famously used
Okay.
was Holocaust denial.
Okay.
So a Holocaust denier might demand
Okay.
direct eyewitness testimony
Right.
from someone who was gassed in a concentration camp.
Right.
But of course, such testimony is impossible by
Right.
definition.
Yeah.
So by imposing this impossible standard of proof,
Yeah.
the denier effectively silences the voices of survivors
Right.
and negates the historical reality of the event
Right.
as understood through other forms of evidence.
Right. So you're using one framework.
Yeah. To completely invalidate another framework.
Exactly. And this is a classic example of a different
Okay.
because there's no neutral ground.
Right.
There's no shared set of criteria
Yeah.
that can satisfy both the denier's demand and the historical record.
Okay, so recognizing these differences is crucial
Absolutely.
Right.
For acting ethically.
in a postmodern world.
In a postmodern world, exactly. It means being aware of situations where
Yeah.
applying our own familiar rules and frameworks
Yeah.
might actually be perpetuating an injustice
Right.
by silencing or misunderstanding others.
So if we encounter these
Yeah.
these like totally irreconcilable differences,
Right.
what are we supposed to do?
Right. Well, he argues that it's not about finding some universal agreement
Okay.
or imposing one side's view on the other.
Right.
Instead, it requires something much more creative,
Okay.
which is the invention of new, what he calls phrase regimens.
Phrase regimen.
Phrase regimens.
Yeah.
So new ones of speaking, listening, and understanding
Right.
that can potentially bridge these gaps
Right.
without erasing the distinctiveness of each perspective.
Okay.
So it's about fostering a space where different kinds of experiences and claims can be articulated and heard,
Yeah.
even if they don't fit neatly into our existing categories.
So this connects with that idea of the fig roll a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, like inventing these new ways of understanding.
Yeah.
And this connects with his later work, The Inhuman.
Right.
What was he exploring there?
So in The Inhuman, Lyotard is grappling with these really big questions of
Yeah.
time,
Right.
technology,
Yeah.
and the very definition of what it means to be human.
Right.
And one of the key distinctions that he makes
Yeah.
is between two senses of the inhuman.
Okay. Two senses of the inhuman.
Two senses of the inhuman.
Okay.
So on the one hand, there's what you might call the dehumanizing inhuman,
Okay.
which is the aspect of advanced technology and capitalism that can kind of treat humans as mere instruments.
Yeah.
He even considers this kind of thought experiment,
Yeah.
thought without a body,
Okay.
as a kind of potential unsettling endpoint of
Yeah.
technological progress.
Okay.
But on the other hand, he also talks about an inventive inhuman.
An inventive inhuman.
An inventive inhuman,
Okay.
which is this force that can push us beyond
Right.
the limitations of traditional humanism
Okay.
and open us to genuinely new possibilities, things
Right.
that we can't even imagine yet.
So being open to the unknown.
To the unknown, exactly.
Okay.
And he linked this to the idea of the event.
The event.
The event. So not just a piece of information, but
Yeah.
something that truly disrupts our existing frameworks
Okay.
and forces us to question our assumptions.
Right.
And he also connected this to his understanding of what he called the postmodern sublime.
The postmodern sublime.
And he uses the art of Barnett Newman as an example.
Newman. Okay.
So think about Newman's large abstract canvases. They don't offer easy answers or recognizable forms.
Well, that's abstract.
It's abstract.
Yeah.
They confront us with something
Right.
that resists easy categorization,
Yeah.
that pushes the limits of our ability to represent or understand it.
Yeah.
And for Lyotard, this kind of art embodies the unpresentable,
The unpresentable.
something that challenges our established ways of seeing and thinking.
Okay. So bringing it all together,
Yeah,
for our listener who's trying to like act as a philosopher in their own life,
right.
what are the key insights that Lyotard gives us?
So I think Lyotard offers us several really vital tools
Okay.
for navigating this complex world.
Oh.
First of all, he reminds us to be aware that those grand unifying stories
Right.
that we once relied on
Right.
are no longer universally accepted.
Right.
And so we need to be attentive
Right.
to the diversity of perspectives out there.
The plurality of
The
perspectives.
plurality of perspectives, exactly.
Yeah.
Second, he encourages us to recognize that our current ways of understanding the world have limits.
Okay.
Right? There are things that escape our grasp.
Yeah.
There are things that we can't fully comprehend or control.
Right.
And third, he urges us to be aware of the reality of deep disagreements, these
Right.
differences where different frameworks of understanding clash.
Yeah.
And then finally, I think he calls us to cultivate an
Yeah.
openness to the unexpected,
All
to
right.
the unpresentable, to those things that might challenge our existing assumptions
Right.
and push us to think in new ways.
Right.
So acting as a philosopher in this sense
Yeah.
is about cultivating a critical awareness of the different language games we're playing,
Right.
recognizing when a different might be at play,
Yeah.
and being open to inventing new ways of
Uh-huh.
understanding and relating to each other.
That's a really insightful way to put it.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up, I want to leave our listener with a final thought.
Okay.
Think about a time when you've encountered a seemingly unresolvable conflict,
Right.
a situation where different sides just couldn't seem to understand each other.
Yeah.
Could a different, in Lyotard's sense, be at play?
That's a great question.
And if so, what might it take
Right.
to move beyond that impasse?
Yeah.
Keeping in mind his emphasis on inventing new ways of communicating
Exactly.
and understanding,
Yeah.
rather than just trying to find a pre-existing compromise.
I think exploring Lyotard's ideas about language games, the unpresentable,
Yeah.
can provide us with some really valuable lenses
Sure.
for understanding the complexities of our world
Right.
and engaging more thoughtfully with
Yeah.
diverse viewpoints.
Right.
It encourages us to embrace the challenge of
Yeah.
understanding
Right.
without resorting to simplistic answers
Yeah.
or imposing a single framework
Right.
on really multifaceted realities.
So the deep dive continues,
It continues.
not just for us,
Yeah.
but for all of you.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us
Thanks for listening.
as we explore the world of Jean-François Lyotard.